Hello, welcome to the Knife Yak channel. Today I'm going to make another video where I will deal with the advantages and disadvantages of serrated blades versus plain edged blades. In a previous video I demonstrated the advantages and disadvantages of these two blade types while cutting a pair of shoes in half. So I will refer you to that video. I also made a previous video where I demonstrated the advantages of a serrated blade for peeling fruit. And so again, go ahead and check out that video when you get a chance. Today, I'm going to do something completely different, something that I never would have thought of doing until this afternoon. It occurred to me on a whim to see what would happen if I tried to carve a tri-stick with a serrated blade. I've been thinking about serrations and the drawbacks of serrations for carving and whittling sticks for almost 30 years now, and I learned a long time ago that it is in fact possible to whittle a stick with a serrated blade. It's not ideal, but it can be done. And then I thought, well, I wonder if you could carve more intricate shapes and notches, such as one would do with a tri-stick. Again, I have a series of tutorials on how to carve the various notches of a tri-stick. This is what I mean by a tri-stick. It's a stick with a bunch of notches that you're supposed to try carving. And this is a way of developing skill in handling a knife and doing basic woodworking tasks with a blade. I mentioned in an earlier video that I oftentimes will carve a tri-stick with a new knife that I acquire because I like to find out what the knife is capable of doing, and I can learn a lot about the ramifications of various blade geometries, blade shapes, handle configurations, and ergonomics. It gives you a lot of knowledge about your knife, and it's a great way to develop skill in handling knives generally. So this is a normal tri-stick that I carved several months ago with a plain-edged Spyderco Military, such as this one. It was not actually this knife, but it was similar, same basic blade shape. This is the tri-stick that I carved this afternoon. And sitting in my backyard, I just decided to do this, and you can see the effect is not very pretty. There's a lot of grooves in the wood, which you can imagine. The teeth dig in and make these grooves, and once you start carving, the teeth tend to channel themselves into the pre-existing grooves, and it's kind of hard not to just make your channels fairly deep. But yeah, you can do it. I have the rounded off end of the stick, or half sphere. I have my 90-degree latch knot. I have a saddle notch. I did the circular reduction, and there's the square reduction. I did my hole, a V notch, and I made the wedge-shaped point or edge with a root stripper notch in the end of it. And there you go. It is possible to carve a tri-stick with a serrated blade. Now I will make a few observations. Let me, sorry, I forgot to actually get a stick here that I can demonstrate some stuff with. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm sorry about that, but here I am. Now, one of the things you'll very quickly notice when you try to whittle or carve wood with a serrated blade is that serrated blades generally have the serrations ground on one side of the blade and not the other. So it's basically like a chisel grind where you have the secondary bevel ground into one side but not the other, And these are called chisel grind because that's how chisels are. And it makes for some very thin and good edge geometry, but because the serrations are ground on what I call the show side of the blade, that's the general term for this. We call it the show side because when the knives are displayed in a display case or photographed for a website or a catalog, I think they grind them on this side because knives are always, when you see knives in magazines or illustrations or whatever, they generally have the blade always pointing off to what would be the left from the viewer's perspective. And if you can see that bevel ground in there, it makes it look really good and sexy, and it catches the light just a certain way, and it looks really, really awe-inspiring, right? And of course, if you had it on the wrong, in a display case, you don't want your knives all going in different directions. So the manufacturers tend to grind the serrations on what I would call the left-hand side from the standpoint of a person holding the knife in front of them with the point straight ahead. It's going to be the left side. And if you're a right-handed person using a standard left or show side ground serration pattern, there's a tendency for the knife to steer itself towards the non-serrated side. So I demonstrated this the other day when I was peeling around an apple. If you're cutting towards yourself as a right-handed person, as you would when you peel an apple or a potato, the serration bevel actually steers the knife around the curve in an advantageous manner. The problem is when you're whittling a stick as a right-handed person, the serrations are on the wrong side. You get a disadvantage in that you have to tilt the knife quite a bit in order to get the edge to engage with the wood. As I can demonstrate here, you can, if I were doing this with a plain-edged knife, I could hold the edge quite flat and get really good thin cuts with a very acute carving angle, and that maximizes efficiency and makes for a very controlled cut. Right? Now, if I do the same thing with this serrated knife, I have to tilt the knife, or I have to tilt the spine of the knife upwards several degrees in order to get the edge to engage with the wood. And I have to cut in deeper, which is not a huge problem because I'm actually trying to, when I'm doing my rounded off end or half sphere cut, I'm going to want to tilt the knife that direction anyway, but in this case I have to do it quite a bit more than I otherwise would, right? Now as I'm doing this, you can see how the serration pattern leaves grooves in the wood which correspond with the teeth and the scallops, and it makes an interesting fluted kind of an effect, which has its own sort of novelty effect, I guess. But I'm not going to carve the whole tri-stick, but I'm just going to demonstrate a little bit of it to kind of so you can see and understand some of the ramifications of what I'm talking about. As I get closer to the center point of the stick, making this rounded end, I have to tilt the knife more and more and more, which you would do with any knife, but in this case it's more exaggerated. And so I mean, yeah, you can do this. It works. You can definitely carve wood with a serrated blade. It's a little bit ugly, right? But I won't complete the entire cut, but you can kind of get the idea of what I'm doing here. Now, when you do stop cuts, you'll very quickly encounter some interesting phenomena. As I would do with a normal plain edge blade, I would normally just set the, let's say I'm going to do the circle or square reduction, I would just set the edge perpendicularly to the wood, and I would just turn the wood around, keeping the edge perpendicular to the wood, and I would just go around and around and around, and you'll end up with this little this little groove, which you can then deepen. Now, when I try that with a serrated blade, I can do the same thing, but you'll notice that as I start to go around, I get a kind of sprocket and chain effect, like on a bicycle, where the wood just wants to roll and advance along the edge, and I end up with these little teeth marks, right? But with the serrated blade, you can actually just use it kind of like a saw. You have to use very light pressure because the teeth will bite in and prevent rotating the stick. But if you do it lightly, you can, in fact, just feel the teeth kind of scratching into the wood. They're like little saw teeth, right? And as you go around a couple of times, as you go around, the line or channel deepens to the point where it becomes an effective stop cut, right? Now I would do that twice, right? So I'm just gonna, you do this just exactly the same way you would with a plain edge knife, and it actually kind of works, you know? So there I've gone all the way around. You can see my two parallel stop cuts. Now to dig out the wood, same thing you do with a plain edge, but you're just gonna get grooves as you perform these little these reduction cuts, and you can see all the little fragments flaking out like that, and they're like it looks like a grass, like a hula skirt kind of, you know. But yeah, you can do this, right? You just do it exactly the same way, but you just get this kind of a weird sort of a striated effect. And then when I want to trim these off, the saw effect actually works pretty well. And you can use the flat side, in other words, the side of the blade that doesn't have the serration bevel, and you can put that flat part right up against the cut, and you have to, and that helps you keep your channel really straight. And so you just kind of go around like this, and that will just trim off these little hula skirt shards, right? Or fringes, or whatever you want to call them. So you can do that, right? And when you go, if we do the same thing on this side, I won't do the whole thing, but just to give you an idea, you just do it on both sides, right? And you go all the way around, and you can trim those off, just kind of saw them off, right? Now, when you get to the part where you're going to reduce this center part, which is thicker, it's kind of like it'll end up being a barrel shape, and you remember me talking about this in my tri-stick tutorial where I discussed how to make this circular reduction. One of the advantages to having the bevel on the wrong side of the blade is when you're thinning out the wood inside the notch, the bias is towards to channel the cut in a scooping motion upwards, and so it tends to dig the wood out without the knife plunging in deeper and deeper into the wood, which can create some awkward splitting effects. This actually kind of allows you to kind of scoop the wood out, and the blade kind of it doesn't go in deeper than you want it to, right? So yeah, you can do this, right? And I mean, it's the end result is, I think, not as pretty. This is my tri-stick that I ended up carving, and I already showed you this earlier, but you know, the notches can be a little bit ragged. It's very interesting trying to do the saddle notch with a serrated blade, because in order to derive the benefit of this experiment, you cannot use, I mean, you could, but I chose to enforce on myself a rule where I could not use the plain portion of this otherwise serrated blade. That would be too easy, and I wanted to find out what I could do with serrations, which means I cannot use the plain portion of the blade for the purposes of this experiment. When I'm carving tri-sticks, especially in some of these more intricate notches, I generally use the tip of the knife because it's easier to execute the curved part, or the curved part of a groove or notch. If you have a very narrow point with a good the narrow part of the blade, it can execute those curves quite nicely. But in this case, I wasn't able to do that. But the fact that the bias of the serration bevel is favorable to this kind of a concave cut, it actually kind of helps. And you can, it's not as good as being able to use the tip, but you can do it. And if you experiment with it, you can kind of get a sense for how to do this, right? I'm not going to demonstrate the whole stick. I just want you to see that this is possible, right? And anyway, you might ask, why would a person even do this in the first place? And the answer is, well, because you need to find out what's possible. You need to know if you can do it or not. I think a lot of people speculate about what's better, plain or serrated, and a lot of it is based on assumptions. But if you actually try it, when you start cutting through the shoe or peeling the apple or carving your notches on a tri-stick or whatever, you can very quickly figure out that sometimes the thing that you thought would be an advantage really isn't. And I may demonstrate other aspects of this debate in subsequent videos. My goal is not to exhaust the subject in this one little video, but I just wanted to give you the idea of perhaps trying to carve a tri-stick with a serrated blade, and you'll very quickly understand what's good and what's bad about this particular blade style in that particular task. That's all for now. Thank you for watching.